We are very privileged to have Lisa join us today. Lisa is an outstanding social worker and manager of Lotus Consulting. She has 25 years' experience in the field of equal opportunity, lobbying to governments that address poverty, social disadvantage, racism, discrimination, and policies that promote oppression of Australian communities. She's an outstanding advocate and has worked in the fields of multiculturalism, disability and youth, family services, and brings with her the experience and knowledge of working in community welfare, media, local government and the education sectors. She has a focus in the context of communities and how policies as well as cultural norms affect access to service opportunities.
Earlier this year, the Centre for Cultural Diversity and Ageing wanted to explore the needs of aged care providers in regional Victoria. And so we ran a series of consultations in 4 towns in Victoria, which was Shepparton, Wallan, Swan Hill and Morwell. But we found that a lot of the issues were similar across the 4 regions. So we were interested in having further discussions about what are the unique issues and what are the support needs of aged care providers in supporting the needs of diverse consumers. We had over 50 aged care managers and staff involved in the consultations across the 4 regions, and they came from a range of different roles such as diversity advisors in the region to aged care quality managers, to volunteers or senior citizen club leaders, and even managers of aged care services or residential care services, to which there weren't that many residential care services in those regions that catered for culturally and linguistically diverse seniors. We decided to collaborate with the ICON agency, which is an agency funded by the Department of Health and Aged Care to provide free translations for aged care providers. Not only for like translations for different languages, but also for people that are hearing impaired. So it's Auslan and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander languages as well. We also collaborated with NARI, who provided in-kind support and expertise around facilitation and knowledge of culturally appropriate care. The Ethnic Communities Council of Victoria provided in-kind support and knowledge around some of the services and resources to support those providers. And of course, the Department of Health and Aged Care regional teams, which came to our consultations as well. And so the project came about because the Department of Health and Aged Care were interested to find out more about the needs of cold seniors living in regional and remote areas across Australia. So the centre decided to focus on Victoria in response to the department's inquiry. And it also came about from the recommendations from the Royal Commission into aged care quality and safety, which looked at some of the concerns they had for seniors in accessing aged care services in regional, remote and rural areas, as well as the needs of culturally and linguistically diverse seniors living in these areas. So we've got our full report available on our website, which has a look at the rationale for the project. The project also looked at the recommendations from the Victorian Parliamentary Inquiry into the support of older Victorians from migrant and refugee backgrounds conducted in August 2022, which contained 76 recommendations. And out of those recommendations was the further support for seniors from cold backgrounds living in regional Victorian towns. So this is a massive issue. Not only for Victoria, but across Australia. But what we wanted to know is some of the nuances within and unique issues within each regional town. Because we know, for example, Geelong will be very different to Shepparton or very different to Swan Hill or Wallan or Morwell or a regional town that you might know about, for example. So basically, the reason why we chose these 4 towns was because they had the highest amount of people over 65 who speak a language other than English and who are over 65 years old. So that was the rationale for choosing those 4 towns. And we didn't choose Geelong because Geelong was a focus on the Victorian Parliamentary Inquiry report, and we didn't want to duplicate those findings in any way. They were already consulted with in the Victorian Parliamentary Inquiry consultations. So basically the purpose of the project was to gather information on the needs of seniors from CALD backgrounds in accessing and using aged care services, create opportunities for aged care leaders and staff in regional Victoria to share learnings and resources and to improve culturally appropriate care, and to also allow them to access culturally appropriate aged care options in regional and rural Victoria, but also to come up with some solutions, because it was about networking, looking at some of the gaps, but also some of the solutions. So we ran a series of consultations around, and some of the key themes that were included in the consultations were some of the demographics and profiles of CALD seniors, both established and newly arrived, residing in those areas, local and sector-wide responses to support the needs of CALD seniors, and designing and developing services that promote culturally appropriate care. And we also worked with some of the regional multicultural peak bodies, aged care organisations, home and community care program for younger people, HAC PYP, and Commonwealth Home Support Program diversity advisors to organise and facilitate the consultations. We ran the consultations. We also gave each participant a survey during the consultation and a post-consultation survey. So you can look at all the details of the survey in our report, and look at some of the findings for each of the areas. Basically, we found that there was significant resources needed in each 4 areas. And we're talking about the fact that in all 4 towns, there was hardly any navigation services. And if there was a navigation service like a care finder program, it was still in its initial stages, but also there weren't, the care finder programs needed training around culturally appropriate care for their staff, or to collaborate with multilingual services, or to, interpreting services, or to have bilingual or multilingual support navigators to support the process of accessing aged care services. They needed brand new culturally inclusive and aged care services. They needed to just create some, because there was hardly any in some of the towns. They needed staff training around culturally appropriate care that was ongoing and not just a tokenistic one-off thing. The big thing that they wanted was professional diversity networks to continue the conversations and to help them link to what's happening in the field and to support and resource their clients. They were often told us that they hardly ever talk to each other, that they don't gather around this issue, and that they were very surprised that there was the first time that they could gather post-COVID in particular. Social isolation and mental health was a significant issue facing seniors from culturally diverse backgrounds. It was really sad, some of the stories that came out around people not leaving their homes and people just not having anything to do, just wandering in the streets because there wasn't any culturally appropriate senior citizen clubs or social support groups. And so we spoke about the creation of them, like how can we create them? But in saying that, the volunteers needed some support as well, because there was one scenario where for the Greek community, everyone would turn to Sula. So everyone would call Sula, and it was like this program, Call Sula program, but Sula's a volunteer. And she was tired in getting all these phone calls from seniors to have something to do. There was a significant need for language and services, interpreting and translation services. So the ICON project was very well received in these areas around translating their brochures and all of their materials. But there was also a shortage of interpreters in some languages. And of course, in terms of the organisations, they needed that diversity mentoring and governance support to create a whole of organisation approach to inclusive practice. So how do their organisations become inclusive, and how can they become a specialist provider under the specialist verification program? And of course, more support for volunteers, as mentioned before. Then around digital literacy, which is a common theme in this field. And I think Joy is going to be talking a lot about what she's doing on the ground around digital literacy for engaging seniors, and also addressing social isolation by connecting to technologies. And then just a unique, standalone recommendation here was to translate the My Aged Care website at large. And just how do we do that so that people can just simply go there and get the information they need? And of course, that's an issue that would be relevant to everyone who speaks a language other than English. So that was very interesting as well. So to find out more, as mentioned before, have a read of our report. Reach out to us if you wanted to explore some ways to collaborate with us on this issue, and if you have any suggestions as well.
Now we have another wonderful speaker and powerhouse joining us today. Her name is Joy Leggo. Joy is a highly consultative and visionary CEO of Cultura in Geelong. She's also featured on our YouTube channel as in our leadership series, so go check that out. And her organisation also won the Centre for Cultural Diversity's Excellence Awards. So she not only is a wonderful speaker, but she has really valuable insights into not only teaching people, but success herself in leading similar organisations for over 20 years through uncertain times, changes, development, and significant growth. She engages across all levels of Cultura while demonstrating the ability to make sound, informed decisions based on facts, with a focus on delivering exceptional services to residents and the wider multicultural community. Joy, we're pleased to have you. Please take it away when you are ready.
I'm going to take you on a little bit of a different journey, perhaps from Lisa, and talk about some of the practical things around delivering culturally appropriate care in regional areas, because it can be done, I believe. We just have to be a little bit more creative in how we go about it and use the supports and partnerships that we have got available to us. Just a little bit about Cultura. We are based in Geelong, but do have a presence heading up towards in the Barwon Southwest region, and we need to continue to do more work in that area. We have 160 residential beds, over 300 home care packages, a number of social support groups. We have a settlement program which includes refugees, settlement and immigration, employment programs, community development, registered training organisation, and a community radio station. So we're vast in our service delivery. The majority of our services, though, do focus on our elderly members of our community. You are going to see a bit of a visual presentation from me. One of the things I would like to say to everybody is about having that connection with the community in which you live. So seeking it out, know your demographics of who's in your community, work out the groups, find those community leaders, and develop a relationship with them, because they are going to be vital in your service delivery to really understand, and they will be your friends and they will help you no end as you develop up your service options to your communities. If you're having them come into social support groups, to your Karenni groups that you might be trying to establish, those community leaders, often they don't see themselves as community leaders, but they are critical to your underlying success. We have found in our residential facilities the development of friendship groups from our ethnic communities groups has been one of the most enriching ways in which we can keep our residents connected to their communities. I'm just giving you an example of some of the things that we do and the activities that we have. The lady with the horse on Oaks Day, we always have a very special day where we have the horse come in and the ladies do fashions on the field and the men all get dressed up and there's a parade and all those sorts of things. All of you will probably have faced staffing challenges, especially during COVID and even now. And in a multicultural space, we're finding it increasingly difficult to get European-speaking staff members that can continue to communicate with our residents. But what we've found is our residents, those that have the capabilities, are teaching our staff those phrases, those languages that are really important. I can always remember having a resident first come into one of our facilities and being greeted by someone in their own language and seeing how they can physically relax. So staffing remains a challenge, probably for everybody still. We have a bit of a dual situation happening here. We've got some of our residents teaching our staff phrases in their languages, but we've also got a resident who was a linguist and an English teacher who is helping some of our new arrivals and refugees, helping them with their English and their pronunciation. So it's very important for this resident that he knows how to correctly say not their Australianised name. He wants to know what their name is from their original birth name. So it's a two-way interaction, and it's all tied up culturally, and it's lovely to see that interaction going on. But staffing does remain a challenge. I want to talk a little bit about food. And this can apply in any setting, in your social support groups, in residential settings, even in your home care package space when you're going into people's homes. We see food as the connector of people. And, every country in Europe has a cabbage roll and every culture has fried bread or dough. This means that we may not be able to share a language, but we can share recipes and memories. And when we share, we awaken all the senses, the smell, the touch, the taste, the feel of making them together. A large group of people laughing around the table while making food, there's nothing better. They may have forgotten, but their hands remember the steps and the repetitive pattern. So we should never underestimate how food can connect people and how you can do that culturally very easily. We have a chili and tomato competition, and this involves all of our groups, our home care package clients, our residents. Our residents grow the tomatoes and the chilies in our gardens, and then we have a competition for the hottest, the largest, the tastiest, you name it, and it's such a fun day. And it's all about going back to nature and growing veggies and touching the earth again. Another thing I don't think we can underestimate is music. Music means movement and dancing. It celebrates the good times. It calls to mind the good memories, the times of rest between the hardships. Most people meet their partners at a dance or a church or went to a movie together. It's amazing that we've seen how we can get people walking straighter and faster with a song they love and a good beat. I don't think that's just a multicultural aspect, but music makes a huge difference. The use of YouTube and Spotify to find music of different cultures has been invaluable. A lot of people will have done this, put together playlists for people when they were in lockdown with COVID, but those with severe memory loss were very positively impacted on the emotional well-being with those playlists and being able to listen to music that they hadn't heard for years. So what is it that we do differently at Cultura? I don't see that we do very much differently. We're doing what we need to be doing. We're touching the lives of the people that we care for and being in tune with what they need from a cultural perspective. Again, I want to go back to staying connected with the ethnic communities. We're here to serve. So it's that partnership thing that's really important. It's reaching out to the Centre for Cultural Diversity and Ageing, reaching out to the Ethnic Communities Council of Victoria as well. There's a number of regional groups and we should tap into those. We invite our ethnic communities in for lunch just to check in to make sure we're meeting their needs, to talk to them a lot about aged care services, how they access services. Lisa said there's a major problem with my aged care and accessing services. I would totally agree with that. So we have actually become a reference point for our community. So they perhaps come to us before they go anywhere else, and then we start them on their journey as to where they need to go. We do a lot of speaking to community groups around aged care. We draw on and celebrate the cultural knowledge of our staff. We hold cultural lunch and learn lessons where the staff share cultural food of their nationality and then have a discussion, and the pride of the staff delivering those sessions is something to behold. And we actually empower our staff to value their language and their heritage. Number of staff that come and say to me, but my English is no good and my writing's terrible. I say, I don't care. It's you and your cultural knowledge and passion that we want to bring to the organisation. We're really lucky that fortunate to have a multi-faith chapel. So I think faith is another really important thing on site. And when it was commissioned, one of our staff members representing the Islamic faith made the following pledge on behalf of all staff and volunteers. Here at Cultura, we have many diverse religions and cultures. We will continue to embrace and foster a successful multicultural and multi-faith culture, a culture that consolidates our connection to each other. Cultura recognises and celebrates the unity that is found in diversity. That is the unity of human values that underpin the ethical core of each faith. Values such as peace, love, non-violence and right action, truth and the respect for the family. So as you can see, this was a representation on the day our multi-faith chapel was represented. So we were simply, the diversity in that room that day was just wonderful. The other thing for us that's really important is community connectedness. So keeping our residents, especially, connected to the community. One of the ways we do these is we have these tri-bikes. Our residents participated in Packer Festa, which is a major multicultural festival here in Geelong that we run. We have 100,000 people down the street, and these were our residents participating in it, and they just loved it, being able to represent got their flags, and it was just an amazing thing. So that community connectedness, again, is really important. Just wanted to give you again another representation here of connecting the young and the old, how important that is, some of the functions that we've had. I just wanted to talk a little bit about culture from our perspective. Our culture is where we learn our manners. The generation we are looking after at the moment are proud of themselves. They are proud of how they look, how welcoming their room is, and that they always have something to feed guests. I find, especially with the women, be this in a residential setting or even in the home, they want to have more toilet paper and tissues or napkins and snacks in their room. They were the managers in their house, making sure all of those necessities were at hand all the time. Their cupboards were full of knickknacks and their doilies to make their space presentable. They grew up with not a lot, and so have worked hard to make their space their own and welcoming no matter what the situation. I believe this sometimes gets overlooked, especially residentially, and we need to display more grace when we get asked for the second tissue box, even though they have one in their room already. Cultural care is part of the spiritual and emotional well-being, and it affects the physical well-being. The more relaxed the resident is about having enough toiletries or food, and food visible to them. Some people come from being the only person they could rely on for food, or from a home that didn't have 3 square meals and 3 snacks a day. Cultural care is a tool we can use to affect and improve a person's emotional, spiritual well-being by having regular friendship groups. And again, this is where I say connected and partnering with your local communities. Resident looks forward to those weekly, monthly events that gives them something to get up and go to. And then once you're up for that group, you might as well join an exercise group while you're awaiting. All of a sudden, your mobility is not declining as much or even improving, as you have the energy to join in a game or a garden walk. You have the energy to go to a residents meeting and have your say. Even if you are not as confident in your English, you know from experience in other activities that people will take time to understand you, that your voice matters, even if it is quiet, that you still have control over your life. So why not take it in both hands? And even if you are in a regional or rural setting, you can still do that. This photo is actually representative of our residents and staff and volunteers. So here at Cultura, our annual cultural diversity report measures the remarkable tapestry of ethnic backgrounds that I'm very fortunate to to work with and lead, and it's woven into the Cultura family. Our 2022 report shows that across the organisation we have 70 nationalities, with our three largest groups at the moment being Italian, Croatian, Dutch, and just over 50% of our staff and volunteers come from a core background. But I'm really happy to answer any questions from anybody about anything, and I'm here to help and support people because I'm very passionate about ensuring, I've heard some pretty horrendous stories of how our multicultural elderly have been cared for at times, and I'm passionate about ensuring that the best service is available as possible. We can do it. Thank you very much.
And I start with Lisa, maybe. Why do you think it was so important that the Centre took on this project to research these, service gaps in regional Victoria? And why do we sometimes think regional areas are missed out when it comes to culturally inclusive service delivery? And maybe Joy can add to that.
Well, basically, it's been an issue that's identified through national inquiries. So obviously the Royal Commission saw this as a recommendation, and also the Victorian Parliamentary Inquiry into the needs of older people from migrant and refugee backgrounds. So it's not only a significant issue that's been identified, but it's also really important because when we look at the infrastructure of some of these areas, there's issues that perhaps are unique that are not identified in urban areas. For example, transport. So for people to get to for older people to get to places, there was issues around how do they actually get to the service? How do they get a taxi? How do they get a train? How do they get a bus? Is there local community transport services, which there are hardly any in these areas? So that can lead to social isolation and mental health issues. There's also a massive lack of culturally appropriate social support programs for people to gather and link and socialise. Perhaps there might be more opportunities in urban areas for people to link. So, for example, the Greek or Italian clubs, or the Vietnamese clubs, the Chinese clubs, for example, for people to gather. Whereas in some of these regional towns, there was only one or two or hardly any. And so that's a real concern. And I think that it's really important that there is a spotlight on regional towns, that the government needs to hear the voices of aged care providers, but also some of the needs of seniors from culturally diverse backgrounds. And that's why the report that has been compiled from this project will go directly to the Department of Health and Aged Care. So we thank everyone for their contribution into the project. And so it is an advocacy piece as well. And we're not sure what's going to come out of these findings. And of course, the PCAC program is across Australia. So we've done our part in Victoria to raise awareness of these issues. And hopefully there's other advocacy pieces happening around Australia, because we know, obviously, if you look at very remote areas like Central Australia, for example, the Northern Territory, there's going to be massive issues facing communities that live in areas where they don't even have access to aged care services at all. So what do we do, in these instances? So I think it's really important to continue the conversations.
Joy, would you like to add anything from your perspective, from Geelong perspective, where you see some of the service gaps that Lisa identified, and why we need to keep pushing for more support for regional areas and for culturally appropriate care in regional areas?
I'm really concerned around, we recently lost a contract for a community visitor scheme. That's now gone to a company in Queensland. How are they going to connect with a multicultural community in Geelong and speak to our clients and get that connection happening? So I've got concerns about that sort of decentralisation, and there seems to be a bit of a government philosophy that they want to deal with less providers and perhaps go for the more generalist providers. And I think we've got to be really careful about that and not lose sight of some of the specialist stuff. But especially in regional and rural areas, you as providers need to be a little bit of everything in a whole range of areas. And I think you can do it if we have a collective approach, and we've got to keep at that and always keep that in the front of our mind. I think that's really, really important. in aged care at the moment, from a legislative viewpoint, it's rapid change and it keeps coming at you. It's constant at the moment. If you're in the home care space, you're really right in the middle of it. You've been given a bit of a reprieve, but you've got 2 years ahead to get yourself ready. That's going to be really challenging. We've got to keep this at this, and it will be really easy for the multicultural side of things to be forgotten. And that advocacy role that Lisa was talking about is really important. We've got to keep it right up there all the time.